He had the magic in his feet, the vision of a maestro, and the audacity to take on anyone. They said he was the next Ronaldinho, a player born to enchant the world, to carry the torch of Brazilian flair, and to define an era. His dribbles were effortless, his creativity unmatched, and his confidence unshakable. When the ball was at his feet, defenders hesitated. They knew that, in an instant, he could humiliate them with a flick, a feint, or a perfectly timed burst of speed. From the moment he stepped onto the pitch, Giovani dos Santos was different. Barcelona saw it. Mexico saw it. The world saw it. He was destined for greatness. But if that were true, why is his name now nothing more than a distant memory? How does a player compared to Ronaldinho, a wonderkid with the world at his feet, just disappear? Giovani's journey seemed like the perfect football fairy tale. Born in a football-loving family, he was a prodigy from the start. At just 13 years old, he was already part of La Masia, Barcelona's legendary academy, the same place that shaped Lionel Messi, Xavi, and Iniesta. And from the moment he arrived, there was no doubt this kid was special. His control of the ball was supernatural. His dribbles were mesmerizing. His left foot, blessed with finesse and precision, made him a nightmare for defenders. He wasn't just good, he was spectacular. Barcelona fans watched in awe as he climbed through the ranks, dazzling at every level. The media crowned him the future of Mexican football, a player who could change the trajectory of the national team. And when he finally made his senior debut for Barca, it felt like the beginning of something historic. The comparisons to Ronaldinho weren't just talk. They trained together, they played together, and for a brief moment, it seemed like Giovani was destined to inherit the magic, the joy, and the global superstardom that his Brazilian mentor had brought to the game. But what happened next was something no one expected. Talent alone doesn't guarantee success. For every Messi, there are 100 players who had the potential but never reached their peak. And Giovani? His decline started in the most unpredictable way. Not with a major injury, not with a shocking scandal, but with a series of choices that would slowly pull him away from the top. Barcelona believed in him, but not enough. With new signings and rising stars, his place in the team was never secure. The club offered him a contract extension, but something was missing. He wanted more. More playing time, more responsibility, more respect. So, at just 19 years old, he left. And that decision changed everything. The world expected him to climb even higher, to dominate at his next club, to prove that Barcelona had made a mistake in letting him go. But instead, his career took an unexpected turn. A turn that would lead him further and further away from the elite level of football. From playing alongside Ronaldinho in La Liga to bouncing between clubs, struggling to find consistency, and battling off-the-field distractions. Giovani's story became a cautionary tale. But why? Why didn't he become the superstar everyone expected? What really happened behind the scenes? The truth behind his fall is far more shocking than you think. And by the end of this story, you'll never look at his career the same way again. Giovani dos Santos was born into football. It was in his blood, in his very DNA. His father, Zizinho, had been a professional player in Brazil before making his way to Mexico, where he became a respected figure in the sport. Football wasn't just a game in the Dos Santos household. It was a way of life. From the moment Giovani could walk, he had a ball at his feet. There was something almost mystical about his connection with it. While other kids chased the ball, he controlled it. While others played, he created. It was clear from an early age, Giovani wasn't ordinary. He was special. Word spread fast. A kid like this wouldn't stay hidden for long. By the time he was 11, He had already caught the attention of Barcelona's legendary academy, La Masia, a place reserved for the most gifted young footballers in the world. The very institution that had molded Xavi, Iniesta, and Lionel Messi now had a Mexican prodigy in its ranks, and what they saw in him was breathtaking. At La Masia, Giovani was electric. His movements were smooth, his dribbling hypnotic. The way he carried himself on the field, effortless, elegant, fearless, made coaches whisper comparisons that would set impossible expectations. They called him the next Ronaldinho, the Brazilian magician who, at the time, was the heart and soul of Barcelona. Others saw glimpses of Messi in him. The low center of gravity, the quick turns, the dazzling footwork. To be compared to either of them was an honor. To be compared to both, it was a prophecy. At just 16, he was already being talked about as the future of Mexican football. A wonderkid, a generational talent, the missing piece that could elevate Mexico to new heights. While most teenagers were worrying about school and friendships, Giovani was being groomed to be a superstar. The pressure was immense. The world was watching. Barcelona nurtured his talent carefully, not wanting to rush his development. But every time he played, it became harder to hold him back. His ability was simply too raw, too explosive to be contained. In the 2005 U17 World Cup, he led Mexico to glory, winning the tournament and being named the second-best player, just behind a young Cesc Fabregas. This wasn't just potential anymore. This was real. The hype reached new levels. He was no longer just a promising talent. He was expected to be great. And Barcelona knew they had something special. In 2007, at just 18 years old, he finally made his senior debut for the club, stepping onto the same pitch as the legends he had idolized. It was supposed to be the start of something legendary. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan. He was getting minutes, showcasing his skills, and proving he belonged. The way he played was mesmerizing. He had the dribbles of Ronaldinho, the flair of a street footballer, and the confidence of someone who knew exactly how good he was. His breakthrough moment came on the final day of the 2007 to 2008 season, when he scored a stunning hat trick against Real Murcia. The Camp Nou erupted. This was it. This was the moment that would mark the beginning of an era. But football can be cruel. What should have been the start of something beautiful was actually the beginning of his downfall. Behind the scenes, things were shifting. Ronaldinho, his mentor, was on his way out. Pep Guardiola was about to take over as Barcelona's manager, and he had a very different vision for the team. A vision that didn't include Giovani dos Santos. And just like that, in a single summer, everything changed. The club offered him a contract renewal, but something wasn't right. There were doubts, uncertainty, whispers that he wasn't as focused as he should be, that his attitude, his dedication, his discipline, things that separate the good from the great, were not at the level expected at a club like Barcelona. Then, the rumors started. Was he really the heir to Ronaldinho? Or was he just another hyped-up wonderkid? Did he have the mindset to reach the top? Or would his career be derailed before it ever truly began? In the middle of this chaos, he made a decision that would alter the course of his entire career. A decision that many wonder if he ever truly recovered from. Before we dive into that, let me ask you something. If you've ever watched a young player full of potential and wondered why they never reached their peak, leave a like on this video, because Giovani's story is far from over, and what happens next is something you won't believe. Giovani dos Santos was no longer just a promising talent. He was a phenomenon in the making, the kind of player that fans and pundits alike spoke about in hushed, almost reverent tones. He was electric, unpredictable, and had that rare ability to make the game look effortless. But it wasn't just Barcelona that saw his brilliance. Mexico was watching too, and when the 2005 FIFA 17 World Cup arrived, the entire country held its breath. It was his moment, his chance to prove that he wasn't just another academy wonderkid, but a generational talent destined to change the trajectory of Mexican football. The pressure was unimaginable. The weight of expectations, the comparisons to Ronaldinho, the whispers that he could be the best Mexican player of all time. It was all building up. But when the tournament started, something became clear. Pressure didn't break Giovani. It fueled him. From the very first game, he was a different breed. While other players needed time to settle into the rhythm of the competition, Giovani was already dictating the tempo. His dribbles were hypnotic, his passing precise, and his vision on another level. The way he moved, the way he combined technical brilliance with raw instinct, it was breathtaking to watch. Mexico wasn't just winning, they were dominating. Giovani, playing as the team's creative engine, was unstoppable. Every attack ran through him. Every moment of magic seemed to involve his touch. By the time Mexico reached the final against Brazil, the world had taken notice. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Brazil was the favorite, the team that had dominated youth tournaments for years. But Mexico, led by Giovani, didn't care about history. They were about to rewrite it. The final was a masterclass. Mexico didn't just win. They dismantled Brazil 3-0 in one of the most shocking upsets in U17 World Cup history. Giovani may not have scored in the final, but he was the heart of the team, pulling the strings like a maestro conducting a symphony. Every touch was calculated. Every movement had purpose. His ability to break through defenses, to create something out of nothing, was mesmerizing. By the end of the tournament, he was awarded the Silver Ball as the second-best player, just behind Cesc Fabregas. But for many, there was no doubt, Giovani was the real star. The way he played, with an infectious joy and a confidence that felt unshakable, reminded everyone of Ronaldinho. The carefree dribbling, the fearless attacking, the smile that never left his face. It was as if he had been molded in the same footballing laboratory that created the Brazilian magician. And that's when the hype truly exploded. The Mexican media hailed him as the future of the national team, the player who would finally put Mexico on the map as a footballing powerhouse. The headlines were relentless. El Niño Maravilla, the Mexican Ronaldinho, the best talent Mexico has ever produced. Experts, former players, and journalists all agreed. Mexico had never seen a player like him before. He was everywhere. Interviews, television specials, magazine covers. Giovani had become a national obsession overnight. Everyone wanted to know more about him. How he trained, what he ate, what music he listened to. Fans dissected his playing style, debating whether he was more like Ronaldinho or Messi. The pressure was mounting, but Giovani seemed unfazed. He had already been training with Barcelona's first team, rubbing shoulders with the likes of Deco, Xavi, and Iniesta. And then there was Ronaldinho, the man he was constantly compared to, the player who had taken him under his wing. Ronaldinho saw himself in Giovani, the same effortless dribbling, the same flair, the same ability to play with pure joy. In training sessions, the two would stay behind long after everyone else had left, exchanging tricks, testing each other's creativity. Ronaldinho believed in him. Barcelona believed in him. All of Mexico believed in him. The pressure to deliver was suffocating. The weight of expectation crushed most players before they ever reached their prime. But Giovani, he didn't just welcome it. He thrived in it. His time in Barcelona was nothing short of spectacular. While most young players struggled with the transition to a higher level, Giovani adapted instantly. His performances were dazzling. His ability to take on defenders, to change the tempo of a game in an instant, left fans speechless. It was only a matter of time before he made his official debut for the first team. And when that moment arrived in 2007, it felt like the beginning of something historic. Giovani, wearing the iconic number 27 shirt, stepped onto the pitch at the Camp Nou for the first time as a senior Barcelona player. The stadium erupted. The fans knew they were witnessing the arrival of a new star, a player they had been hearing about for years. He was finally here. This was his moment. The expectations were sky high. The hype surrounding him was unlike anything Mexico had ever seen before. This wasn't just about club football anymore. This was about national pride. But with great expectations come great dangers. And what happened next would change everything. Before we get into that, tell me, do you remember watching Giovani in that 2005 U17 World Cup? If you do, hit that like button. And if you never saw him play, trust me, you're about to learn why the world thought he was destined to be one of the greats. The dream was now reality. Giovani dos Santos had done what millions of kids around the world could only fantasize about. He had made it to the first team of FC Barcelona, not just any Barcelona, but one of the most dominant teams in football history, a squad filled with legends, led by some of the greatest players ever to grace the sport. The same field where Ronaldinho entertained the world, where Xavi and Iniesta dictated the tempo of modern football, and where a young Lionel Messi was already carving out his legacy. And now, stepping into that world was Giovani. In 2007, at just 18 years old, he made his official debut for the first team. The moment was surreal. The lights of the Camp Nou, the chants of nearly 100,000 fans, the sheer weight of the jersey on his back. It was the kind of pressure that could make or break a young player. But Giovani had spent years preparing for this. His time at La Masia had been relentless, sharpening his skills, molding him into the kind of player that Barcelona demanded. And now it was his time to shine. When he stepped onto the field, there was an undeniable electricity in the air. Fans had heard the stories, seen glimpses of his brilliance in the youth ranks, and were desperate to witness it at the highest level. Would he live up to the hype? Would he be the next great Barcelona star? It didn't take long for him to show what he was capable of. His first touches were effortless, his dribbling smooth, his confidence undeniable. He moved like Ronaldinho, shoulders relaxed, a slight bounce in his step, as if he knew he could do whatever he wanted with the ball. And then it happened. A flash of brilliance, a quick turn, a burst of acceleration, a perfectly placed pass slicing through the defense. The Camp Nou erupted. This was why they had waited for him. This was why he had been compared to the greats. But football, as beautiful as it is also unforgiving. Despite the moments of magic, Giovani struggled to secure a place in the starting 11. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because the competition was overwhelming. Think about it. He was trying to break into a midfield and attack dominated by Xavi, Iniesta, Messi, Henry, and Ronaldinho. These weren't just great players. These were legends in the making. And as much as Barcelona fans wanted to see him thrive, the brutal reality of elite football began to surface. Talent alone wasn't enough. Game after game, Giovani had to fight for every minute he got on the pitch. When he played, he showed flashes of brilliance, dribbles that left defenders behind, quick passes that broke defensive lines, moments of flair that reminded everyone why he had been so highly rated. But in a team full of superstars, those moments weren't always enough. He had the skills, but did he have the discipline, the consistency, the mental toughness to handle the demands of playing for a club where every match was a battle for survival? Pep Guardiola, who would soon take over as head coach, had a clear vision for Barcelona, a vision based on structure, tactical discipline, and unwavering commitment to his philosophy. He wanted players who fit perfectly into his meticulously crafted system, players who lived and breathed football, who made the right decisions every time they touched the ball. And for all of Giovani's talent, For all his moments of magic, there were concerns behind the scenes. Was he fully committed? Did he train with the same intensity as Messi? Did he understand that raw skill alone wouldn't secure him a future at the club? Then came his greatest performance in a Barcelona shirt. The final match of the 2007 to 2008 season. A hat-trick against Real Murcia. It was the kind of display that made fans dream again. The kind of performance that made people believe this was just the beginning. But it wasn't. Because while the world expected him to build on that moment, to cement his place as one of Barcelona's future stars, something else was happening behind closed doors. Whispers began to circulate. Stories emerged. Rumors of distractions, of off-the-field issues, of a lack of focus. And then, the biggest question of all. If Giovani dos Santos was so talented, why wasn't he becoming an undisputed starter? Before we uncover this shocking truth, let me ask you something. Do you think raw talent is enough to succeed at the highest level? If you do, hit that like button. Because what happened next in Giovani's career is something no one saw coming. It was the perfect farewell, the kind of night every footballer dreams of. The Camp Nou was packed, the energy in the air electric. This was May 17th, 2008, the final game of the season. For most, it was just another match, a routine fixture against Real Murcia. But for Giovani dos Santos, this would be the defining night of his Barcelona career. He had spent the entire season fighting for a place in one of the most competitive squads in football history. Ronaldinho, Henry, Messi, Eto'o, Xavi, Iniesta, legends in the making, established superstars and rising icons. Breaking into that team was an impossible task for most players, but Giovani had something different. He had flair, unpredictability, and the kind of technical genius that made the ball stick to his feet. Still, doubts lingered. Was he really ready to shine at the highest level? Could he handle the pressure? Did he have what it took to carve out a legacy in one of the world's biggest clubs? On that night, he answered all those questions in just 90 minutes. The game started like any other, but soon, Giovani took center stage. From the first whistle, he played like a man possessed, like someone who had something to prove. The way he moved, the way he controlled the ball, it was as if he was determined to make this night unforgettable. Then it happened. The first goal, a beautiful finish, precise and clinical. A strike that left the goalkeeper frozen. The crowd erupted. The second goal, pure magic. He weaved through defenders with ridiculous ease, sending them the wrong way before curling a shot past the keeper. The stadium could barely believe what they were witnessing. The third goal, the final exclamation point. A thunderous strike, a statement, a reminder that this was no ordinary talent. A hat trick, a performance of pure brilliance. And he had done it at just 19 years old, on his final night, wearing the iconic Blaugrana jersey. The headlines the next morning were filled with his name. Giovani dos Santos has arrived. Barcelona's next superstar. The Spanish media showered him with praise. The comparisons to Ronaldinho, already present throughout his youth, reached new heights. The world believed he was about to explode. His celebration that night was a mixture of relief, joy, and a subtle defiance. He had spent the entire season trying to prove himself, and now, under the bright lights of the Camp Nou, he had delivered a performance that demanded attention. His teammates embraced him. His name echoed through the stadium, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything had fallen into place. But then, something happened, something that no one expected. Instead of becoming Barcelona's next great number 10, instead of stepping into the legendary role that Ronaldinho was leaving behind, Giovani dos Santos was gone. Sold, just like that, after a night that should have cemented his place in the club's future, after proving to the world that he could be a difference maker. Barcelona let him go. The transfer stunned fans. Why? Why would a club sell a 19-year-old prodigy who had just delivered one of the most exciting performances of the season? There were rumors, whispers behind the scenes, talks of attitude problems, of distractions off the pitch, of a lack of discipline. Some said that Guardiola, who was about to take over as manager, didn't see Giovani as part of his new project. Others believed that the club had lost patience with him. But the truth was far more complicated. There were reports that Giovani's camp had demanded a higher salary, that his father, who was heavily involved in his career decisions, was pushing for a move. Some believed he had been advised that his best chance for success lay away from Barcelona, where he could be a starter instead of a substitute. But was that really the right move? Guardiola, a manager known for his meticulous planning, had already made ruthless decisions before even stepping onto the Barcelona bench. He had let Ronaldinho and Deco go, sending a clear message. This was a new Barcelona, a team built around discipline, work ethic, and tactical intelligence. Players who didn't fit the vision, no matter how talented, would not be part of the project. And Giovani, he was a player of instinct, of freedom, of unpredictable genius. The kind of player who thrived in chaos, who relied on moments of magic rather than strict tactical structure. Could he have adapted? Could he have learned to mold his game to Guardiola's demanding system? We will never know, because on June 18, 2008, just 1 month after his hat trick, Giovani dos Santos was sold to Tottenham Hotspur for €6 million. Just 1 month. Think about that. 1 month after the best performance of his young career, after a night that should have secured his place in Barcelona's future, he was shipped off to England. The dream was over before it even had a chance to begin. It didn't matter that he was just 19 years old. It didn't matter that he had scored a hat trick in his final game. Football is ruthless, and Barcelona had decided that Giovani dos Santos wasn't part of their future. The reaction was mixed. Some saw it as a huge mistake, believing that Barcelona had given up too soon on a generational talent. Others felt that Giovani himself had made the wrong choice, that he should have fought for his place, learned under Guardiola, and waited for his time to shine. Because let's be honest, if he had stayed, if he had continued developing under one of the greatest teams in history, his story might have been completely different. But instead, he was leaving the comfort of Barcelona for the brutal reality of the Premier League, a league where young, technical players either adapted quickly or disappeared completely. So what happened next? Did Giovani prove Barcelona wrong? Did he become the superstar that so many believed he would be? Or was this transfer the beginning of the end? Before we uncover the next chapter in his shocking journey, let me ask you something. Do you believe Barcelona made a mistake in selling him? Or do you think this was the moment that sealed his fate? Tell me in the comments. I know you love stories like this, so subscribe, because what happens next in Giovani's career is something no one saw coming. Giovani dos Santos had it all: talent, flair, and the kind of technical brilliance that made fans believe he was destined for greatness. He had grown up in La Masia, trained with some of the greatest footballers of all time, and, in his final game for Barcelona, delivered a performance that should have guaranteed him a future at the club. But instead of becoming a pillar of the post-Ronaldinho Barcelona, instead of being part of Pep Guardiola's revolution, he was gone. Sold. At just 19 years old, after years of being groomed to be Barcelona's next superstar, Giovani left for Tottenham Hotspur, a transfer that shocked many and confused even more. Why would he leave? Why would Barcelona, a club famous for developing young talents, let him go so easily? Was this a mistake, or was there something deeper happening behind the scenes? From the outside, it looked like an opportunity for Giovani to finally become a protagonist. At Barcelona, he had been stuck behind Messi, Henry, Eto'o, and Iniesta, legends who were either at their peak or about to reach it. No matter how talented he was, the road to a starting position seemed nearly impossible. Maybe a move to England, to a club where he could be given the spotlight, was exactly what he needed. But football isn't just about talent. It's about timing, about making the right decisions at the right moment. And looking back, this might have been the moment where everything started to go wrong. Behind closed doors, there were whispers that Giovani wasn't fully committed, that his attitude in training wasn't at the level required to succeed at Barcelona. Guardiola, a coach known for his obsession with discipline and tactical precision, had no patience for players who didn't fit into his system. He had already pushed Ronaldinho and Deco out, two world-class talents who he believed didn't have the right mindset for his vision of Barcelona. If players of their caliber weren't safe, what chance did a 19-year-old have? But there was another factor at play: money, influence, the business of football. Giovani's camp, his agents, his father, and those advising him believed he needed a fresh start. There were reports that they had been demanding a better contract at Barcelona, one that reflected his potential. But Barcelona wasn't willing to play that game. They had seen this situation before. Young players who believed they were ready for more before they had truly proven themselves. And Barcelona had a history with these situations. They had let go of young players before. Cesc Fabregas, Gerard Pique, and even Luis Enrique had left Barcelona as youngsters because they felt there wasn't space for them in the first team. Some, like Pique and Fabregas, would return as stars. Others, like Bojan Krkic and Halilovic, would never fulfill their potential. The difference between success and failure was often just a matter of patience and making the right move, and that's what made Giovani's decision so controversial, because he didn't go to a club with a history of developing young talent. He didn't go somewhere with a clear plan for his growth. He went to the Premier League, the most physical, intense, and unforgiving league in the world. Tottenham Hotspur, at the time, was a club in transition. They weren't a dominant force, they weren't challenging for major titles, and they weren't known for nurturing young technical players. The Premier League was a completely different world from La Liga. It wasn't built around possession, patience, and skillful build-up. It was about speed, strength, adaptability, and Giovani, he wasn't ready for that. When he arrived in London, the expectations were still sky-high. The English media hyped him up as one of the biggest young talents in the world, a player who could bring a level of flair and creativity that Tottenham had been lacking. He was seen as a potential game-changer. But almost immediately, cracks began to show. At Barcelona, he had grown up in one of the most structured football environments on the planet. Everything was controlled. The style of play, the tactical approach, the way players trained. At Tottenham, things were different. The football was more direct. The games were faster, more aggressive, and physically demanding. And unlike in Barcelona, where he had grown up as the golden boy, he now had to earn everything from scratch. And he struggled. He showed glimpses of his talent, moments of brilliance that reminded everyone why he had been compared to Ronaldinho. But they were just that, moments. He wasn't dominating games, he wasn't controlling the tempo, and more importantly, he wasn't adapting to the tactical demands of English football. And then came the biggest problem of all: off-the-field distractions. Reports began surfacing that Giovani wasn't taking training seriously, that he was more focused on his life outside of football than on making an impact at Tottenham. Stories about his nightlife, his partying, his lack of discipline began to circulate. And in the Premier League, where managers demand relentless dedication, this was a red flag. At Barcelona, his talent had been enough to make people overlook his weaknesses. At Tottenham, it wasn't. His manager at the time, Harry Redknapp, would later say something that stunned everyone. He's got so much talent, but he needs to get his head right. He's always injured, He's always in the nightclub. It was a brutal statement, and it changed the way people viewed him. Suddenly, Giovani wasn't seen as a young player adapting to a new league. He was seen as a wasted talent, someone who wasn't serious about football. And from that moment on, everything became harder. Instead of becoming a star in the Premier League, instead of proving Barcelona wrong, he found himself on the bench, then in the reserves, then completely out of the squad. It happened so fast. One moment, he was one of the most exciting young players in the world. The next, he was an afterthought. And the biggest question still remains: did he make the wrong decision, or was he never going to succeed at Barcelona in the first place? Before we dive into what happened next, let me ask you something. If you think he should have stayed and fought for his place at Barcelona, hit the like button. And if you think leaving was his only chance, let me know in the comments. Because what happens next in Giovani's career? It only gets crazier. The Premier League is not a place for the weak. It's ruthless, fast, and physically brutal. Players who don't adapt quickly are left behind, swallowed by the intensity of English football. And for Giovani dos Santos, a player raised in the possession-based, technical, and tactical world of La Masia, the transition was a nightmare. From the moment he arrived at Tottenham Hotspur, the reality of his decision began to sink in. The hype was massive. He was supposed to be the next big thing, a creative force that would take English football by storm. But instead of becoming a star, his career started falling apart almost immediately. The first problem? His style of play didn't fit the Premier League. In Spain, football was an art, slower, methodical, and focused on intelligence and movement. But in England, everything was chaotic and aggressive. The pace was relentless, the defenders stronger, the tackles more brutal. There was no time to breathe. And for a player like Giovani, who relied on skill and technique rather than strength and speed, it was overwhelming. At Barcelona, he had time to think, time to express himself on the ball. At Tottenham, he was constantly under pressure. The defenders were faster, tougher, and more physical than anything he had faced before. And instead of rising to the challenge, he struggled. But that wasn't the only problem. His biggest enemy wasn't the league itself. It was his own mindset. At Barcelona, his raw talent had always been enough to open doors. His dribbles, his vision, his unpredictability, they made people overlook his weaknesses. But in England, talent alone wasn't enough. Discipline, consistency, and mentality were just as important. And that's where Giovani started to fall apart. The signs were there from the beginning. Missed training sessions, a lack of effort, a reputation for not taking things seriously. It didn't take long for his first manager at Tottenham, Juan Ramos, to start losing patience. And then, when Harry Redknapp took over, the situation got even worse. Redknapp, a manager who valued hard work over talent, didn't hold back. He's got so much ability, but he doesn't work hard enough. He's always injured, always in the nightclub, Redknapp told reporters. That statement changed everything. Suddenly, Giovani wasn't seen as a young talent struggling to adapt. He was seen as a player who wasn't serious about football. And once that reputation sticks, it's almost impossible to shake. His minutes on the field started disappearing. Instead of developing into the star that Tottenham had expected, he found himself on the bench, then in the reserves, then completely out of the squad. But the club still had hope. He was only 20 years old. Maybe he just needed time. Maybe a lone move would help him rediscover his confidence. So, Tottenham sent him away to Ipswich Town, a club in the English Second Division. Think about that. Just 2 years earlier, he was scoring a hat-trick for Barcelona. Now, he was being loaned out to a club that wasn't even in the Premier League. It was a clear message. He had failed. But even at Ipswich, he couldn't find consistency. Injuries, a lack of impact. And the same questions about his work ethic followed him. He wasn't dominating games. He wasn't proving people wrong. And when he returned to Tottenham, nothing had changed. So, they sent him away again, loan after loan. First to Galatasaray in Turkey, a new country, a new league, a new chance. But the same story. Injuries, inconsistency, and flashes of brilliance that never lasted. Then to Racing Santander in Spain, closer to home, a league more suited to his style. But again, the same result. Then to Real Mallorca, where he finally started showing glimpses of the player he was supposed to be, but by then, his reputation was already destroyed. No one saw him as the future of Mexican football anymore. No one saw him as a potential world-class player. They saw him as a wasted talent, a player who had everything but threw it all away. And the worst part, Giovani himself never seemed to realize how bad things had gotten. He still had moments of magic, a great dribble here, a beautiful goal there. But football isn't about moments. It's about consistency. And Giovani had never learned how to deliver that. Other players who left Barcelona early had proven themselves elsewhere. Gerard Piqué left for Manchester United, but returned stronger than ever. Cesc Fabregas became a superstar at Arsenal, and later won everything with Spain. Thiago Alcantara left for Bayern Munich and dominated in Germany. But Giovani, he went from playing with Messi and Xavi to fighting for minutes in second division teams. And it wasn't because of bad luck. It was because he never adapted, never evolved, never took responsibility. The world of football is unforgiving. If you don't work harder than everyone else, if you don't push yourself every day, you get left behind. And Giovani, for all his talent, never had the mindset of a champion. And that's why his time in Europe ended in disappointment. The Premier League was supposed to be his launch pad to greatness. Instead, it exposed his weaknesses. Instead of proving himself, he became a cautionary tale. And the biggest question still remains: how did a player this talented fail so many times? Before we go deeper into what happened next, let me ask you something. Do you think Giovani could have been one of the world's best if he had the right mentality? Or was he always destined to fail? Tell me in the comments, because his story is far from over. There are moments in football that define a player's career. Moments where everything, past failures, doubts, and struggles, collapse into a single, unforgettable second. For Giovani dos Santos, that moment arrived in 2011, just when it seemed like his career was slipping away. He had gone from being the golden boy of Barcelona to a forgotten name, drifting through clubs, carrying the weight of unfulfilled potential. The kid who was supposed to be a legend was now just another player lost in football's endless cycle of broken promises. But football always gives one last chance. And for Giovani, that chance came where it had all begun: Mexico. No matter what happened in Europe, no matter how much he struggled, no matter how many times clubs gave up on him, his country never turned its back on him. And when he put on that green jersey, something inside him changed. He played with confidence, energy, and a hunger that had been missing for years. It was as if the real Giovani had been waiting for this moment. And in the 2011 Gold Cup, he finally had the stage to remind the world of who he really was. From the very first match, he was electric, dribbling past defenders, creating chances, playing with the same joy and arrogance that had once made him a star. The comparisons to Ronaldinho didn't seem so distant anymore. He was playing like a man who refused to be forgotten. But the true moment, the one that would define his career, came in the final. Mexico versus USA. A battle bigger than football. A war of rivalry, pride, history. The game was chaos. Goals flying in from both sides, momentum shifting every few minutes. Mexico led 3-2, but the United States refused to surrender. The tension in the stadium was unbearable. Then came minute 76. Giovani received the ball inside the box, and in an instant, everything collapsed around him. The US defense closed in, the goalkeeper rushed forward. There was no space, no escape. But Giovani didn't panic. With a touch of pure instinct, he flicked the ball over the sliding keeper, stepped back, and, with defenders closing in, chipped an impossible shot into the top corner. For a moment, the world froze. And then chaos. The ball sank into the net. The stadium erupted. The crowd exploded. It wasn't just a goal. It was magic. It was defiance. It was resurrection. Giovani ran to the sideline, arms wide open, eyes filled with emotion. He had spent years being doubted, being questioned, being called a wasted talent. But this was his moment. This was him saying, "I am still here." That night, Mexico lifted the Gold Cup, and Giovani was the hero. It felt like everything had changed. And then just 1 year later, he had a chance to make history again. The London 2012 Olympics. Mexico had never won an Olympic gold medal in football. Never. But this time, they had something special. A generation that played with no fear. A team that had everything to prove. And Giovani? He was their leader. Every match, he carried them. He created. He controlled. He inspired. He was the Giovani that Barcelona had once believed in, the one who made people dream. By the time Mexico reached the final against Brazil, the world expected Neymar and his team to crush them. But Mexico had other plans. Just 28 seconds into the game, everything changed. A mistake by Brazil. A quick reaction. Oribe Peralta struck. 1-0 Mexico. The dream was alive. Giovani, even injured, was still there fighting, pushing his team forward, giving everything he had. He wasn't just playing for a gold medal. He was playing for his redemption. Then, in the 75th minute, Peralta scored again. 2-0. The impossible was happening. Brazil pulled one back in stoppage time. But it was too late. The final whistle blew. Mexico was Olympic champion. History had been made. Giovani, standing there with a gold medal around his neck, eyes filled with emotion, had done it. After years of being lost, of hearing that he was a failure, of wondering if he would ever fulfill his potential, he was on top of the world. It felt like the moment where everything finally made sense. He had conquered his demons. He had found himself again. It should have been the beginning of a new era for him. But football doesn't work like that. Because just when it seemed like Giovani had rewritten his destiny, the worst was yet to come. Before we go further, let me ask you something. Do you think Giovani finally fulfilled his potential at this moment? Or was this just an illusion before everything collapsed? Tell me in the comments. Because his story is far from over. Giovani dos Santos had always been unpredictable, a player full of magic, but also full of mystery. One moment, he looked like a future legend, capable of dominating world football. The next, he seemed to drift, lost in decisions that made no sense for someone with his talent. But of all the choices he made, one stood out as the most controversial, the one that truly defined his career. In 2015, at just 26 years old, Giovani walked away from European football and signed with LA Galaxy in Major League Soccer. It was a move that sent shockwaves through the football world. Players of his caliber at that age should be fighting for Champions League titles, competing in the best leagues, playing among the greatest. Giovani did the opposite. He turned his back on that path and chose one that, for many, represented giving up. The reaction was immediate. The press labeled it a step backward, a sign that he lacked ambition. Fans who had followed his journey from La Masia to the Mexican national team felt betrayed. How could a player who once shared the field with Messi, Xavi, and Iniesta abandon European football so early? The debate raged. Was he taking the easy way out? Or was there something deeper behind his decision? Giovani defended his move. He spoke about wanting a new challenge, about the growth of MLS, about how he believed he could help elevate football in the United States. But few were convinced. The timing didn't make sense. He was in his prime years, still capable of playing at a high level in Europe. This was the moment when he should have been reaching his peak, not settling into comfort. Many believed he had chosen money over glory, and that was the reputation that followed him from that moment on. He became the player who didn't want it enough, who had all the talent in the world, but none of the hunger to be great. The truth is, once you make a decision like that, it's almost impossible to change how people see you. At first, things went well. The MLS welcomed him as a superstar, a marquee signing who would bring excitement and flair to the league. His arrival was celebrated. Stadiums were packed. He played with joy, rediscovering the freedom that he had lost in Europe. He scored goals, provided assists, and reminded people why he had once been considered a generational talent. But it wasn't long before the patterns started again. One great game, then 3 where he barely made an impact. One moment of brilliance, then long stretches where he seemed uninterested. It was the same Giovani, just in a different setting. The problem was never just the league or the teams he played for. It was him. He had never built the mentality of a champion. He had never learned how to be consistent. And in a league where he was no longer competing against the best, where he wasn't constantly pushed to improve, that inconsistency only grew worse. He had flashes of magic, moments where it looked like he was enjoying football again. But they were just that, moments. They weren't enough to make him great. They weren't enough to erase the doubts that had surrounded him for years. When he wanted to, he was still unplayable. But the problem was he didn't always want to. While he was in the United States, the players who had once been his peers were achieving greatness. Neymar was winning the Champions League. Messi was rewriting history. Even players who had struggled, like Angel Di Maria, had fought their way back to the top. Giovani was playing in front of half-empty stadiums, in matches that barely made headlines outside the United States. His name was no longer part of the global football conversation. He wasn't seen as an elite player anymore. The world had moved on without him. Then came the injuries. At first, they were minor setbacks, but slowly they started piling up. He missed games, lost rhythm, struggled to regain form, and as time passed, it became painfully clear he was declining, not because he was getting older, but because he had never truly evolved. The intensity that had once driven him was gone. By 2018, at just 29 years old, he was no longer considered a top player. Not in MLS, not anywhere. It was a shocking reality. How could someone who had once been one of the most exciting young players in the world already be on the decline before turning 30? The answer was simple. Giovani had never pushed himself to his limits. He had never had the discipline, the drive, or the resilience that separates the great from the forgotten. He had relied on raw talent for too long, and talent alone was never enough. His move to MLS wasn't just a transfer, it was a turning point, the moment when he stopped chasing greatness. And once a player stops chasing greatness, he can never go back. He was no longer the Wonderkid from Masia, no longer the Olympic champion, no longer Mexico's golden boy. He had become something else, a player who had it all, but let it slip away. And that's why, when people talk about Giovani dos Santos today, they don't talk about what he achieved. They talk about what he could have been. They talk about the talent that was never fully realized. They talk about a player who once had the world at his feet and let it slip away. So let me ask you something. Do you think Giovani dos Santos made the right decision by going to MLS? Or do you believe he threw his career away? Tell me in the comments, because his story is not over yet. Giovani dos Santos was once the greatest promise in Mexican football, the boy who made Barcelona fans dream, the hero of the 2011 Gold Cup, the Olympic champion who helped Mexico achieve its greatest triumph. But in football, glory is not eternal. By 2019, he was no longer a star, no longer considered one of the best, no longer even a name that commanded respect. His European career had ended in disappointment. His time in MLS had faded into irrelevance, and now, at 30 years old, there was only one place left to go back home. His return to Mexico was supposed to be a story of redemption. When he signed with Club America, the biggest club in the country, the fans believed this was the moment everything would finally make sense. He had left Mexico as a young prodigy and was now returning as a veteran wiser, with years of experience in top-level football. He was supposed to dominate, to be the leader, to show that he still had something left to give. But the Giovani who arrived in Mexico was not the same Giovani that fans remembered. He was slower, less explosive, and looked like a player who had left his best days behind. The same dribbles that once fooled world-class defenders now rarely worked. The same confidence that once made him fearless was now fading. Fans began to wonder if he had made a mistake by coming back. Instead of being the superstar they expected, he struggled to make an impact. And then came the injuries. It started with minor setbacks, small muscle issues that kept him out for a few weeks. But over time, they became more frequent, and each time he returned, he seemed even further from his best form. His body was breaking down, and with each passing game, it became clear that he was no longer the player he once was. The frustration in the stands grew louder. The media questioned his fitness, his dedication, his desire to compete. Some accused him of being unmotivated, of having lost his love for the game. And the worst part was that he didn't respond. He didn't fight back. He just faded into the background. Another player struggling to keep up. Then came the night that changed everything. The Clásico Nacional, America versus Chivas, the biggest rivalry in Mexican football, a match that defines careers. For Giovani, it would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. In the 36th minute, a reckless challenge from Antonio Briseño sent him crashing to the ground. The stadium went silent. Players turned away in shock. The camera zoomed in on the deep cut on his thigh, blood pouring down his leg. It was a horrifying scene, the kind of injury that ends careers. He was rushed off the field, taken straight to the hospital. And though he eventually recovered, something inside him never did. After that night, he was never the same. He tried to come back, tried to rediscover his rhythm, but the magic was gone. His confidence had disappeared. His body couldn't handle the demands of top-level football anymore. The man who had once played with Ronaldinho, who had shared the pitch with Messi, who had made Mexico believe in miracles, was now struggling to keep up in Liga MX. He still had moments, flashes of his old self, but they were rare. Instead of leading America to championships, he became a shadow of the player he once was. And in 2021, it was over. The club didn't renew his contract. No European team came calling. No MLS club offered him a new opportunity. He became a free agent. No team wanted him. Just like that, at 32 years old, the football world had moved on. Giovani dos Santos, once a symbol of hope for Mexican football, was now a forgotten name. No farewell tour, no grand goodbye, just silence. A player who had trained alongside legends, who had lifted trophies, who had been compared to some of the greatest talents of his generation, had disappeared from the game. And yet, even now, one question remains. Is this really the end? Because in football, sometimes, just when you think a story is over, it finds a way to surprise you. Could there still be one final chapter left for Giovani dos Santos? Or has his time truly run out? Let me know in the comments, because what happens next might shock you. Giovani dos Santos had everything to become a football legend. He had the talent, the technique, the vision, and the natural flair that made fans believe he was destined for greatness. He trained at La Masia, played alongside the best, and carried the dreams of an entire nation on his shoulders. But instead of fulfilling his destiny, his career became one of the biggest mysteries in modern football. How did a player once compared to Ronaldinho and seen as Mexico's future superstar end up as a forgotten name? What really went wrong? Some say it was his mentality, that he never had the discipline to reach the top, that he lacked the hunger and drive that separate the good from the great. Talent alone isn't enough. Football history is full of gifted players who never made it because they weren't willing to sacrifice everything for success. Giovani had moments of brilliance, but he never showed the consistency of players like Messi, Neymar, or even his younger brother Jonathan, who built a more stable and respectable career. His attitude was questioned everywhere he went. At Barcelona, despite his talent, he couldn't convince Guardiola that he had the mentality to be part of the club's future. At Tottenham, Harry Redknapp openly criticized his lifestyle, saying he spent more time in nightclubs than on the training ground. At LA Galaxy, he arrived as a superstar, but never fully committed to being the leader the team needed. Even in Club America, when he was supposed to prove himself in his home country, he looked physically and mentally unprepared for the challenge. Others believe the problem wasn't his mentality, but his choices. That he was simply at the wrong club at the wrong time. When he left Barcelona, many thought it was a mistake. Yes, breaking into that squad was incredibly difficult, but what if he had stayed and fought for his place? Look at players like Pedro, who also wasn't a guaranteed starter, but worked his way into the team. Or Thiago Alcantara, who left, but went to a club that actually helped him grow. Giovani, on the other hand, went to Tottenham, a club that didn't have a clear plan for him. And when that didn't work out, instead of finding a team that suited his style, he kept bouncing around, never staying long enough to truly settle. His move to LA Galaxy was seen as his final mistake, the moment he officially stopped being part of elite football. But what if he had chosen differently? What if he had returned to La Liga instead? What if he had gone to a competitive mid-table team where he could have been the star, but still played at a high level? Could his story have been different? Another theory is that his body simply betrayed him. Injuries followed him everywhere. From small muscle problems to serious setbacks, they kept him from maintaining rhythm and consistency. Some say it was his playing style, that his dribbling and movement made him an easy target for defenders. Others believe he never took care of his body the way elite players do, that his lack of professionalism off the pitch contributed to his physical decline. When he was younger, his natural talent was enough to carry him. But as he got older, as his speed faded and the injuries piled up, he didn't have the physical or mental preparation to adapt. Football analysts, former players, and coaches have all debated the reasons behind his downfall. Some blame his lack of discipline, others his poor decisions, others his injuries. But maybe the truth is that it was a combination of everything. A player with his ability should never have disappeared like this. He should have been leading Mexico in World Cups, competing at the highest level, leaving behind a legacy that future generations would admire. Instead, he became a lesson, a reminder that talent, no matter how special, means nothing without the right mindset, the right decisions, and the right sacrifices. Former teammates and coaches have spoken about him over the years. Some still defend him, saying that he was misunderstood, that he had the right intentions, but was never in the right environment. Others are harsher, saying that he wasted his chances, that he had everything but never really wanted it enough. One of his former coaches once said, "Giovani was the most talented player I ever worked with, but he never wanted to suffer. He never wanted to go through the hard part of becoming great." And that might be the real answer. Football rewards those who fight, who push through the pain, who dedicate every single moment of their lives to the sport. Giovani, for all his skill, never seemed willing to make those sacrifices. Even the fans, who once adored him, are divided. Some still hope for a miracle, that somehow, even now, he could make one last comeback. Others have moved on, believing that his story is already written, that he will always be remembered as a wasted talent. It's frustrating because everyone knows what he could have been. Watching old highlights of Giovani dos Santos is like watching a movie that was never finished. The flashes of brilliance are there, the promise of something incredible, but the story never reaches its full potential. So now we ask, what do you think? Was Giovani dos Santos a victim of circumstances, or was he the architect of his own downfall? Could he have done something differently, or was he always destined to fade away? Let me know in the comments. Make sure to subscribe, because what comes next in this series is something you don't want to miss. Giovani dos Santos' story is one of brilliance, frustration, and missed opportunities. He was a player who, at his peak, could do things on the pitch that few others could. He had the magic in his feet, the creativity to break defenses apart, and the natural flair that made him a joy to watch. But football isn't just about talent. It's about discipline, consistency, the hunger to be the best, and the willingness to make sacrifices. And that's where Giovani's journey took a different turn. From the very beginning, he was destined for greatness. Raised at La Masia, trained alongside Lionel Messi, and praised by some of the greatest minds in football, he had everything needed to reach the very top. He was a Wonderkid, a future superstar, a player who could have dominated world football. When he broke into Barcelona's first team, the expectations were sky high. He was compared to Ronaldinho, seen as the next big thing, and carried the dreams of an entire nation on his back. But instead of becoming a key part of Barcelona's future, he was gone in just a year. His move to Tottenham was supposed to be the next step, a place where he could grow, adapt, and establish himself as a star. But instead of fighting for his place, he drifted. Reports of nightlife, lack of commitment, and training ground issues started surfacing. Managers questioned his attitude, and despite his talent, he failed to secure a consistent role in any of his teams. The once promising Wonderkid soon became a forgotten name in European football, but Mexico never lost faith in him. Every time he wore the national team jersey, something inside him reignited. The 2011 Gold Cup final against the United States was a moment of pure genius. His goal, a moment of brilliance that reminded the world of what he was capable of, became one of the greatest in Mexico's history. Then came the 2012 Olympics, where he helped lead his country to a historic gold medal, cementing himself as a national hero. For a brief moment, it seemed like everything was falling into place. It felt like he had finally found his way back. But instead of using that momentum to relaunch his European career, he chose a different path. His move to MLS in 2015 was a turning point. Some saw it as an exciting challenge, an opportunity to be the face of a growing league. But to many, it was the moment he stopped being taken seriously. He was just 26, still in his prime, still capable of playing at a high level in Europe. But instead of fighting for his place among the elite, he chose comfort. He still had moments of brilliance in MLS, but they were just that, moments. The fire that had once driven him was fading. By the time he returned to Mexico to play for Club America, he was a different player. The injuries, the inconsistency, the years of never fully pushing himself had taken their toll. He was no longer the explosive, confident dribbler that fans remembered. He struggled with fitness, faced harsh criticism, and never became the star that America had hoped for. His infamous injury in El Clásico Nacional was the final breaking point. After that, his decline was inevitable, and when his contract ended in 2021, No top club wanted to take a chance on him. Just like that, he was out of football at 32 years old. It's a story that leaves fans divided. Some believe he was unfairly treated, that he never found the right club, the right coach, or the right system to truly thrive. Others say he wasted his talent, that he had everything but never had the mentality to be great. Maybe it was a combination of both. But the reality is, we'll never know what could have been. And now I want to hear from you. Do you think Giovani dos Santos could have been one of the best in the world if he had made better choices? Or was he never destined for greatness in the first place? Let me know in the comments. And if this story shocked you, wait until you hear the dramatic downfall of another player who was once seen as a future legend. Click the video on the screen now and watch the incredible story unfold.